Welcome back to Wonderful Words of Life. I'm Bernie Dake, and we are joined again today by Aleata Dawkins, who is coming all the way from Washington, D.C. It's been a pleasure to get to know you in the few moments we've had together today. And this series that we're working on is all about mental health. And Aleata comes with a passion for mental health in particular. Last week, if you missed, you'll want to go back and check out the first episode. We just talked about the idea of being overwhelmed. And this week, as we get into different parts of depression, we're going to talk about some things that Aleata breaks down into different types, or maybe how depression's viewed. So first, let me just say welcome back, Aleata.
Great. Thanks for having me.
We're glad that you're here. And I wonder now, having spoken about being overwhelmed last week, if we could talk about this part one for you as you've kind of prepared for our listeners.
Yeah. I wanted to speak in terms of shifting from our last session into overwhelmed and how in our society today, because we have this constant flow of going from one thing to another, and it's passed down not only to parents, you see the kids doing the
Yeah.
same thing, whether they're overly involved in activities, and church and other things, that we are missing kind of some of the natural clues that are given away when someone is having a mental health episode. So for the purpose of this particular podcast, we're going to focus on depression. And depression is such a vast topic.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that we understand that depression is a mental health condition. And there's very varying diagnosis of depression.
Yeah.
You have bipolar, where you have the depressant part, but you have manic part. You have major depression disorder. You also have some people who are affected with seasonal disorder. We just
Yeah.
time changed just recently, so we have some people who get a little bit more depressed when it's cloudy and gray outside
Yeah.
versus when it's sunny outside. But I also want to really focus on the terms of how do we distinguish depression from being in an episode, a mental health episode, versus periods of sadness.
Okay.
So periods of sadness are things that happen in our life: the loss of a loved one, loss of a relationship, loss of job, unexpected changes that will cause us to have sad feelings. I'm hurt, I'm disappointed, things like that. Depression is more characterized as a period in your life where you're experiencing or exhibiting things where you're losing interest in activities. There's an increase in sleep patterns, increase of not being able to fully explain what is going on, but just I've heard clients describe it as just feeling, the feeling. Like there's a lot going on in my head, but I can't really pinpoint to what it is or
Yeah.
how I'm feeling, but I'm just going through life, the motions of life, but not really participating in my life. And so if that's one of our listeners, I really want you to know that the first step to understanding if you might be dealing with depression or having some depressive symptoms is really looking at how long you are in that place of what I call
Yeah.
of that unknown, the great unknown. I've heard it described of just kind of walking through a dark forest with no direction at all, not really knowing if I'm going forward or backwards, north or south, east or west, but just there. And that inability to kind of pull yourself out of it, regardless of if someone is inviting you out. When you have those instances in your life and you see someone, maybe a loved one, who are withdrawing from activities they love, then those are kind of the signs that we should be looking for to say that, hey, maybe I'm not just having a period of sadness. Maybe I am experiencing some depression. And oddly enough, there are over 40 million people who are experiencing depression at any given time in our society. That's 1 out of 7.
Wow.
1 out of 7 people. So of the people who have been down on this floor, somebody has experienced
Yeah.
depression at some
Yeah.
point in the life. And as we continue to move forward in society and we're doing a lot of things and as social media becomes more present, in our lives and our inability to detach from it, we know that there has been a significantly incline in depression. And some of the top things that we have looked at, and you can see that statistics say the reason why it's on the incline is the legalization of marijuana. Right? Most people take it or they smoke it, however, whatever forms that they utilize it, they take it to feel better about themselves, but it's actually a depressant. You know, the increase or the lack of access to healthy foods. So the increase of sugar, high fructose corn syrup, all of these different additives in our food. Notice most people during the middle of the day who has their 2:00 coffee appointment, they kind of get it to get that extra boost. But shortly afterwards, you feel kind of this little lull.
Yeah.
You know, so the increased access to caffeine is definitely that. And then social media. Because we've gotten away from having a lot of family time and a lot of face time with individuals, we've been able to isolate ourselves with our phones.
Yeah.
And we are comparing our lives to perhaps some fictional persons we follow. You know, people take a bunch of selfies to get that right frame, or you turn left or right to get that picture of the rose in the back frame for you. And those who are experiencing depression can sometimes, you know, pit themselves up to somebody they don't even know.
Yeah.
And so that just brings about a whole another opening of things to look at. And because we're moving forward so fast in society, we as parents, friends, we are not necessarily paying attention to those clues when we see people draw away.
I think when we prepared for this and meeting with you, the idea that there could be a perceptible stigma as well.
Absolutely.
Like we perceive that people think of depression as one way or another. There's obviously biblical accounts of depression, and as a Christian organization, you know, who believes the Bible to be true, we have to learn from that experience and know that we're not alone. We're never alone. That's a good thing to kind of think of, and for us, even the most joyous life moments. Having a baby can bring about depression.
Absolutely.
And these are very real things, and people need to know they're not alone. In my brain. Now you're the expert.
Yeah, you're not alone. And that's one of the things we'll talk about a little later, that you're not alone. But when you focus on in terms of the stigma that's around depression or mental health in general, I like to use kind of the analogy in terms of if I were sick, where would I go? I would probably go to my doctor or hospital. If I break my foot, I'm going to the foot doctor, but no one counts that as something negative. But if there's something that I believe that is wrong with my brain chemistry, physiologically, no one. There's a stigma to that. There's a stigma for me going to get help or to talk to someone. And why wouldn't there be? Because in society, every instance where you've seen something that's taken place, I know we talked about 9/11 a little earlier, or if there's been, you know, an assassination of a president, or let's look at the school shootings that have happened.
Out of control,
Society has overly reported what has come out on these psychological evaluations. So now you tie into someone who did a bad thing, you know, perhaps had a momentary slip in judgment, to they now have a mental health disorder. So that ties into the stigma that we perceive mental health in society. And in the church is even worse. You know, there's a perception in terms of where does depression come from, as well as addiction. You know, we have the disease model, we have a psychological model, but there's also a moral model to it, you know, in terms of if you are struggling with something in your life that is not necessarily clearly pointed out. And we'll talk about the story of Elijah and him going through depression, but he's not the only one in the Bible that we can probably pull from. We don't necessarily pay attention to what is going on, what is happening. And from a church perspective, sometimes there's been perceptions where if you're going through something, you must have done something.
Yeah.
There must be a spirit tied to you. Well, what people don't understand is if your family has had a history of depression, you are more than likely to have some episodes of depression in your life itself. And depression often comes after big highs in our life. We can't necessarily always stay on the high roller coaster. You get a promotion, it's good, and then you get in a job and it kind of goes back. Or your daughter graduates from high school or college. That's a great thing, but now she's about to leave.
Yeah.
Those transitions life. So there's always this ebb and flow in life that we should expect. And it kind of leads us, if we utilize the story of Elijah, in terms, there's a lot of different literature that you can look up in terms of him being depressed. But I mean, who would think he would be depressed? He's an orator God. He's a mouthpiece. God speaks through him to the people. And you see periods of his depression in 1 Kings 19 after he has just killed 450 false prophets, Bill, where God has actually showed up on his behalf. We know his story as him bringing back the widow woman's son. All of these great things he did as a mouthpiece of God, but shortly after that, when someone was threatening his life, he actually ran. He ran, he fell asleep up under the broom tree, and an angel came and woke him up and said, "Get up and eat." And he didn't. He stayed there. The Lord actually had to send the angel back for him. "Get up. You should eat. Your journey is not done." And he did not want to do that. After that account, you'll see that he spent 40 days on a journey, and he went into a cave. The angel of the Lord is speaking to you and telling you that your journey is not over. You are the mouthpiece of God in this setting. You've just killed false prophets on behalf of the Lord, and you go into a cave. So if Elijah, one of God's mouthpiece, is suffering from what we perceive and believe is depression, because that's very similar to someone who is dealing with depression, as just spoke about, that withdrawal, that isolation, he goes into a cave and God has to pull him out himself. An angel couldn't do it. His past works of how good he was didn't help him feel good about himself. In fact, I think at one point he was like, "Just take me away from here. God, I'm finished. I've done your work. The people won't listen, so I'm no good. I'm not worthy to do it." And those are some of the instances that those who have been through depression that they face. Not feeling worthy. Even though they're tied to families and tied to other individuals, that overwhelming feeling of that I'm not there, I can't connect, no one understands where I am. But I believe that God has put things in the Bible to help us through instances like that. Sometimes we just might not be able to know how to pull it out. And so Elijah went through depression, and it took someone, in this case, God, pulling him out of it. And so if there's someone who's listening to this podcast and you're experiencing some of the things I talked about are some of the key symptoms of being in a depressive state. Now, notice there's a difference between periods of sadness and depression. Depression is really lasting a couple of weeks up until months. It might break, but it always kind of comes back. You always come back to that place where you want to isolate yourself and you feel like you're the only person standing in this big black forest. But it does take someone. And the same thing is for depression. It'll take someone to recognize those symptoms and talk and have communication regarding, can I help you? And I believe what better place to have that than in a church, but I think a couple of things in order for us to get us. Now, don't get me wrong. Some churches are there, just for the month of May, in our services, we've talked about mental health. And then people were able to write in questions and things like that to get answers from a biblical perspective. But I do believe that we should do our due diligence and pull those who are experts or learn more about it, depression, so that we can recognize it, that it's beyond It's not a moral attack.
Yeah.
It could be a chemical imbalance, and more than oftentimes it is. And again, as I said, if you have family members who have suffered with depression, you are more than likely to suffer it with yourselves. Girls are more likely to be more susceptible to depression than men. And boys, however, it is underreported in boys because of the stigma
Yeah.
that, as guys, you have to have it all
Gotta be
together.
strong.
You
Gotta
got to
be
be
strong.
strong. You can never be weak. And as women, you should be prepared to handle it all. But the truth of the matter is, we're not prepared to handle it all.
Right.
And when we have those instances where we cannot handle it all, we should be able to go to our local churches, the place where we worship,
safe
to
place.
receive that help, because Elijah's not the only one who suffered and wanted to give up. We have David, you have Moses, who all had these great and mighty callings on their life per se, but at the same time they wrestled internally about what their purpose was, even though God had kind of told them what their purpose was, and they were often leaders of other people.
Aleata, if someone in our audience is looking for help, where can they go?
I believe the best place that we should be able to go to is the church,
Yeah.
to be able to provide that extra resource and support around an individual who might not be feeling like themselves at the moment.
Yeah.
It could be a momentary thing, but it could be something that needs a little bit more clinical support and help, possibly some medication. And I just want us to know that it's not a stigmatism to get help for yourself.
Yeah.
We go to the doctor for everything else. There's a doctor for your teeth. There's a doctor for your leg. There's an internist for your body. Then we have counselors and clinicians who are the doctors to help you in your brain. So the church should be the first place we should be able to turn to.
I wish you could be sitting where I am and just see this wonderful, beautiful, godly woman talk about this passion that is hers in mental health. We want you to know you're not alone. And if you are listening to this podcast and you need help, please reach out to someone that you trust. If you don't have a church home, call the Salvation Army. The Salvation Armies in all of our communities are normally run by Salvation Army officers who are pastors. They can get you to the right people that can help you. You're not alone. We're glad that you've joined us this week. We hope you'll come back next week. And somewhere between now and week 11, you too may get to hear our guests sing. I'm just saying. God bless you.